The information in this episode is current as of the date recorded and is not intended as financial, tax, or legal advice. You should consult your tax, financial, and/or legal advisors before implementing any transactions and/or strategies concerning your finances. And with that, let's get to this week's episode.
I'm Jason Nickerson, President and COO, and welcome to this special edition of Financial Focus. Live on remote location from my home office, we wanted to bring you an update from an episode that we recorded a couple of weeks ago regarding the nation's debt ceiling and the federal government's discussions on how to deal with that and the potential for default and the difference between the debt ceiling and potential default versus government shutdown. Well, it appears, as we somewhat expected, if you watch that episode, that the federal government would come to an agreement and solve this issue, and we would not default on our expenses. We were getting very close to the deadline, and right at the 11th hour, it seems that an agreement has been made. If you remember from that episode, we talked about the debt ceiling being about $34 trillion, and the issue was that we were bumping right up against that. The agreement that they've come to is not to increase that $34 trillion, but instead to push the conversation down the road a couple of years. What does that mean? Their agreement essentially eliminates or pauses the debt ceiling for a period of 2 years, which allows the federal government to pay its expenses and go into debt as much as they need to for the next 2 years. And then at that time, the conversation comes back, and presumably how much ever debt we have incurred from now until then will become the new debt ceiling, whatever that number is above the $34 trillion that it's set at now. How did they come to that agreement? Well, through negotiations, they did find some cost-cutting measures. Recently, a bill was passed that provided the IRS about $80 billion of additional funding to increase enforcement measures. And as a part of this agreement related to the debt ceiling, they scaled that back by about $20 billion. They also impacted some other programs, but programs that people have been worried about being impacted by this agreement were not, such as Medicare and Social Security. Those programs were left alone. Military funding was also substantially left alone as well. One of the impacts that you might see from this, or that we are seeing from this, is prior to the agreement on the debt ceiling and how to deal with this, U.S. Treasury yields had increased. And for those of you who invest in treasuries would have seen prior to the agreement the yields increasing due to fear that we were going to default on interest payments. With that agreement now in place and fears essentially alleviated, Treasury yields have come down as demand has gone up for those types of securities. So it seems that disaster has been averted, as we somewhat expected it to be anyway. And for now, we have pushed this conversation down the road for a couple more years. But stay tuned. 2 years from now, the debt ceiling will be a conversation in our government again. Thank you for tuning in to this special episode. We'll see you next week.